A mother of 12 went to sleep paralyzed. When she woke up, there were 2 fresh surgical scars on her neck, 7 inches long, professionally stitched, bleeding heavily. No doctor had touched her. No hospital had admitted her. No surgical team had operated on her during the night. Yet when medical professionals examined her weeks later, the scans told an impossible story. Someone, or something, had performed actual bilateral carotid artery surgery on her while she slept in her own bed. The woman felt the wounds with trembling fingers, saw the blood soaking through her nightgown, and realized something even more shocking. She could move. The paralysis that had trapped her for nearly 2 weeks had simply vanished. Her left arm responded to her commands. Her left leg obeyed her will. The pain that had been her constant companion was gone. Those scars, though, they would become something far stranger than anyone could have predicted. They would reopen and bleed every single month on the exact same date for the next 27 years. Fresh blood, real wounds, 324 times. Thousands of witnesses would watch it happen, month after month, unable to explain what they were seeing with any known medical science. Her name was Nohad El Shami, and the monk who appeared beside her bed that night had been dead for 95 years. The operation he performed left physical evidence that doctors confirmed was real. The instructions he gave her would spark a global phenomenon that continues at this very moment in churches around the world. What happened to Nohad over the next 27 years goes beyond a single miraculous healing. She would receive monthly visits from this deceased saint. He would give her specific instructions that produced additional miracles, healings that other people experienced, physical objects that defied scientific explanation, predictions about future events that would later unfold exactly as described. When Nohad finally died in May 2025, she left behind evidence so tangible, so physically undeniable, that even the most hardened skeptics are still struggling to dismiss what she experienced. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, step by step, detail by detail. But I need to warn you, the deeper we go into this story, the more impossible it becomes. The medical documentation is real, the witnesses number in the thousands, the physical evidence is still being examined today. But before we go any further, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below telling me what you think about this case. Do you believe something supernatural happened here, or do you think there's a rational explanation we're missing? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know your thoughts. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the other incredible true stories I'm uncovering. What I'm about to reveal gets even more impossible from here. Now let's dive in. The nightmare that would eventually lead to Nohad's impossible healing began on an ordinary evening when she had no warning that everything was about to change. January 9th, 1993, Nohad El Shami was moving through her evening routine in Mezarib, Mount Lebanon, doing the same thing she'd done thousands of times before. At 55 years old, she was managing a household with 12 children, 7 sons and 5 daughters, and the evening probably felt like every other evening she'd lived through. That sense of normalcy shattered in seconds. Her left leg went weak first. She tried to take a step and felt it buckle beneath her, nearly sending her crashing to the floor. Before she could process what was happening, her left arm went stiff, refusing to obey the commands her brain was sending. Then the left side of her face began to droop, pulling downward as if invisible hands were tugging at her features. When she tried to call out, the words came out slurred, distorted, wrong. Her family saw it happening. They recognized the signs immediately. This was a stroke. This was catastrophic. They rushed her to Saint Maritime Hospital in Jubail, and within minutes of arrival, emergency room doctors were running tests, taking scans, trying to determine the extent of the damage. The results came back within hours, and they were devastating. Dr. Joseph Chami, the cardiologist who first examined her, immediately referred her to intensive care. Dr. Antoine Nachakian and Dr. Majid Chami took over her case, running extensive consultations, ordering X-rays and brain scans, searching for any possible treatment option. What they found made them shake their heads. The damage was severe, catastrophically severe. Nohad had suffered hemiplegia, complete paralysis of the left side of her body, but that diagnosis was just describing the symptom. The cause was what made her condition hopeless. 80% of her left brain arteries were blocked, 70% of her right brain arteries were obstructed. The blood flow to her brain had been so severely compromised that the damage to her neurological system was extensive, and the doctors told her family, permanent. They searched for words that might offer some hope. They mentioned that perhaps, at some undefined point in the future, there might be a possibility of attempting surgery, replacing the blocked arteries with plastic ones. But even as they spoke, their tone carried no conviction. It was a theoretical option, not a realistic one. The procedure was experimental, dangerous, and unlikely to restore what she'd lost. The truth, unspoken but understood by everyone in that room, was simple and brutal. There was no medicine that could cure Nohad, no treatment that could reverse what had happened. This was her life now. For 9 days, Nohad remained in that hospital bed while doctors monitored her condition, hoping for any sign of natural improvement, any indication that her body might compensate for the damage on its own. They checked her vitals, they ran follow-up tests. They watched and waited. Nothing changed. The paralysis remained absolute. Her left arm hung useless at her side. Her left leg couldn't support even a fraction of her weight. The left side of her face stayed frozen, making it nearly impossible to eat normally, to drink without assistance, to speak clearly enough to be easily understood. And underneath it all, constant and unrelenting, was the pain. It radiated through her body in waves that gave her no relief, no respite, no moment of peace. Sleep became difficult. Comfort became impossible. Every hour felt like an eternity. When the doctors finally discharged her, sending her home after 9 days of intensive observation, the message was clear. Even if it remained largely unspoken, there's nothing more we can do for you here. Go home. Adjust to your new reality. This is permanent. Nohad's family took her home, and she went straight to bed. What else could she do? She couldn't walk without complete support. She couldn't use the bathroom without her husband's help. She couldn't feed herself. Her children had to give her food and water through a straw because she couldn't control her mouth well enough to eat normally. She was trapped, imprisoned in a body that had suddenly, violently stopped working, facing a future of complete dependence with no hope of recovery, no hope of improvement, no hope of ever regaining what she'd lost. For 3 days, she lay in that bed, enduring agony that no medication could adequately address, wrestling with the reality of what her life had become. And it was during those 3 dark days that her eldest son, Saad, made a decision that would change everything. Saad refused to accept what the doctors had said as the final word. He couldn't watch his mother suffer like this, couldn't accept that this was how her story would end. So he turned to the one place where his family had always turned when medical science reached its limits. He traveled to Anaya, to a hermitage perched in the mountains where a monk named Charbel Makhlouf had lived and died nearly a century before. Saad had heard the stories all his life, stories of impossible healings, of prayers answered in ways that defied medical explanation, of miracles that continued to occur decades after the monk's death. Standing in that hermitage, surrounded by the evidence of countless answered prayers, Saad prayed with an intensity born of desperation. He prayed for his mother's healing. He prayed for an intervention that only God could provide. And following a tradition that desperate families had been practicing for decades, he collected something precious, consecrated oil and soil from Saint Charbel's tomb. When Saad returned home and his sister applied that oil and soil to Nohad's paralyzed body, something happened that neither of them expected. Nohad felt it immediately, tingles in her hands and feet. Sensation, feeling, response. It was the first sign her paralyzed limbs had shown since the stroke that any connection remained between her brain and her body. It wasn't healing. Not yet. The paralysis remained, the pain continued, but it was a flicker of something, a spark of possibility in what had seemed like absolute darkness. And that flicker was enough to keep hope alive, even if just barely. The feeling faded after a while, leaving Nohad still trapped, still helpless, still suffering. But something had shifted. Something had begun. And that night, as Nohad drifted into an exhausted sleep, her mind filled with pain and prayers, she had an experience that felt nothing like an ordinary dream. The experience came with a clarity that dreams don't possess. Nohad found herself walking, actually walking with both legs, working perfectly, climbing stairs at the hermitage in Anaya. She could feel the stone steps beneath her feet, could sense the mountain air on her skin, could see with perfect clarity the monastery buildings rising around her. She entered a chapel where Mass was being celebrated. Monks in black habits surrounded her, their voices rising in prayer and song. Everything felt so real, so solid, so present that the line between sleeping and waking seemed to dissolve entirely. During the Mass, one of the monks approached her. She'd never seen his face before, couldn't have described his features if someone had asked. But there was something about his presence that radiated both peace and power in equal measure. He gave her Holy Communion, and as she received it, she felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with physical temperature. When she woke from that experience, the paralysis remained, the pain continued, reality crashed back in with all its weight and suffering. But the memory of what she'd experienced stayed with her, vivid and clear, refusing to fade the way normal dreams do. She didn't know it yet, but that vision was preparing her for something that would happen 3 days later, something that would shatter every assumption about what's possible in the world we think we understand. The date was January 22nd, 1993. Nohad was lying in her bed, probably drifting in that strange space between sleep and waking that pain and exhaustion create. And that's when her room filled with light. Not the gradual brightening of dawn, not the soft glow of a lamp being turned on. This was sudden, brilliant, overwhelming light, so bright that it should have hurt her eyes, but somehow didn't. And in that light, 2 figures materialized beside her bed. They weren't transparent, they weren't ghostly or ethereal like you might imagine spirits to be. They appeared solid, physical, real. 2 monks dressed in black habits with white beards, standing right there in her bedroom as if they'd walked through the door like any normal visitor. Nohad's first reaction should have been fear, terror even, but something about their presence dissolved any panic before it could form. One of the monks moved behind her, positioning himself to support her back, holding her steady with a pillow. And as he did, something miraculous happened. The constant, agonizing pain that had been her companion for 13 days simply vanished, just disappeared, as if it had never existed. The relief was so complete, so unexpected, that it took her a moment to even process what had happened. For the first time since her stroke, she felt no pain, none at all. The second monk stepped closer, moving to stand beside her bed. He reached out and placed his hands gently on her neck. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and authoritative, carrying a certainty that left no room for doubt. "Don't be afraid. I am Father Charbel. I am here to operate on you." Nohad felt his hands on her throat, and then she felt pain, but this was different from the pain she'd been enduring. This was sharp, focused, purposeful. This was the pain of something being done to her body, not the pain of her body failing. The monk's hands moved with absolute precision. She could feel pressure. She could feel cutting. She could feel the systematic movements of someone performing an actual surgical procedure on her neck. There was no hesitation in his movements, no uncertainty. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, exact. She didn't know how long it lasted. Time felt strange, elastic, impossible to measure. But throughout the entire experience, she remained aware. This wasn't like being under anesthesia, where consciousness simply vanishes. She was present for every moment, feeling everything, aware of exactly what was being done to her. The monk supporting her from behind kept whispering reassurances, telling her to stay calm, telling her that everything would be fine. His presence was a comfort, even as she felt the sharp pain of incisions being made in her neck. And then, without warning or transition, it was over. Nohad's eyes opened. Full consciousness returned with shocking suddenness, and the first thing she realized was that something fundamental had changed in her body. She could move her left arm. She commanded it to move, and it responded immediately, perfectly, completely. Her left leg, which had been dead weight for 13 days, obeyed her will. She sat up in bed, actually sat up on her own for the first time since the stroke, and as she moved, she felt something wet on her neck. She raised her hand and touched her throat. Her fingers came away covered in blood. Fresh blood, real blood, still warm from her body. Her heart pounding, she stood up. Both legs supported her weight. She walked to the bathroom on her own, moving with a steadiness that should have been impossible. And when she looked in the mirror, she saw what had been done to her during the night. 2 long surgical wounds ran down both sides of her neck, each approximately 7 inches long. They were deep incisions, professionally stitched closed with surgical sutures, the kind of precise, careful stitching that only a trained surgeon would know how to do. And they were bleeding heavily, blood running down her neck and soaking into her nightgown. Nohad stared at her reflection, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. These wounds hadn't existed when she went to sleep. She was certain of that. Her family could confirm it. There had been no marks on her neck, no injuries, no cuts of any kind. Yet now she had fresh surgical incisions, properly stitched, actively bleeding, positioned exactly where a surgeon would make cuts to perform bilateral carotid artery surgery, the very type of surgery the doctors had mentioned as a theoretical last resort. But more impossible than the wounds themselves was what had happened to the rest of her body. The paralysis was gone, completely gone. She could walk, she could move both arms freely. Her face had regained its normal movement and expression. The constant, debilitating pain had vanished. She was healed. She walked out of the bathroom and found her family in the hallway, their faces reflecting shock and confusion and something that might have been fear. They stared at her standing there, walking normally, the blood from her neck wounds visible on her clothing. They examined the incisions, touching them gently, trying to understand what they were looking at. These weren't scratches. These weren't superficial marks. These were deep surgical wounds, professionally closed, actively bleeding. The questions came in a rush. What happened? How did you get these wounds? Who did this? When? Where? And Nohad tried to explain, tried to put into words the experience she'd just had. She told them about the light, about the 2 monks appearing in her room, about the one who identified himself as Father Charbel, who told her he was there to operate on her, about feeling the surgery being performed, feeling the incisions being made, feeling the precision of his hands working on her neck. Her family listened, their expressions showing the same struggle Nohad herself was experiencing, trying to reconcile what seemed impossible with the undeniable physical evidence standing right in front of them. No surgeon had been in their home, no medical team had arrived, no operating room existed in their house. Yet Nohad had surgical wounds that looked exactly like they'd been created by a skilled surgeon performing a specific, complex procedure. The implications were staggering, but the evidence was there, on Nohad's neck, impossible to deny or explain away. The following night, as Nohad was still processing the impossibility of what had occurred, she had another vision. This time, the monk who had operated on her appeared to her alone, and he explained everything. His words were clear, direct, purposeful. He told her why he had done what he had done, why he had left visible scars instead of healing her in some invisible way. Every word carried weight, carried meaning, carried an importance that Nohad immediately understood would shape the rest of her life. "I am Saint Charbel," he told her. "I did the surgery to let people see and return to their faith. I operated on you with the power of God, and I left these scars by His will so that everyone can see them, especially those who have distanced themselves from God, from the church, and from the saints, so that they may return to the faith." The scars weren't accidental. They weren't an unfortunate side effect of the healing. They were intentional, deliberate, meant to serve as ongoing proof that something beyond natural explanation had occurred. Then Saint Charbel gave Nohad specific instructions, a sacred promise he asked her to keep for the rest of her life. "I ask you to visit my hermitage in Anaya on the 22nd of every month and attend Mass regularly for the rest of your life." He also revealed something else that added another layer to the mystery. The second monk who had been present during the operation, the one who had supported Nohad and relieved her pain, was Saint Maroon himself, the founder of the Maronite Church, a figure who had lived and died in the 4th century. Nohad agreed without hesitation. She would make the pilgrimage every 22nd. She would attend Mass regularly. She would share her testimony with anyone who wanted to hear it. It was a small price to pay for what she'd received. But she had no idea, no conception whatsoever of what keeping that promise would actually mean, because those scars on her neck weren't going to heal and fade like normal surgical wounds. They were about to do something that would provide ongoing physical evidence of the supernatural for the next 27 years. And that's when the truly inexplicable pattern began. The first 22nd after her healing, Nohad kept her promise. She made the pilgrimage to Anaya, walking the mile from the hermitage to the monastery, attending Mass with a handful of other believers who'd gathered that day. She prayed, she gave thanks. She fulfilled the commitment she'd made. And that's when her scars began to bleed again. Not just a little seepage from wounds that hadn't fully healed. The incisions on her neck opened and bled heavily, as if the surgery had just been performed moments ago. Fresh blood flowed, soaking through whatever she used to cover the wounds, creating a visible, undeniable physical phenomenon. Nohad assumed this must be part of the normal healing process. Maybe surgical wounds did this sometimes. Maybe it was her body's way of completing the healing that had begun. After a few days, the bleeding stopped. The wounds closed again. The scars remained visible, but they were sealed, healed, no longer active. Then the 22nd of the next month arrived, and the scars opened again. Blood flowed again, and after a few days, they closed again. The pattern was establishing itself, and with each repetition, the impossibility of what was happening became more undeniable. This wasn't normal healing. This wasn't how human bodies work. Wounds don't spontaneously reopen on a precise monthly schedule. Healed surgical incisions don't bleed fresh blood on a specific calendar date. Yet that's exactly what Nohad's scars did. Month after month, year after year, the 22nd would arrive, and her scars would open and bleed. A few days later, they would close. Then the cycle would repeat the following month. This pattern continued for 27 years. Think about what that means. 324 times, Nohad's scars reopened and bled on schedule. 324 times, witnesses watched it happen. 324 times, the wounds defied every principle of how the human body heals, how scar tissue forms, how injuries respond over time. Medical professionals who examined her couldn't explain it. Doctors who documented the phenomenon had no framework for understanding what they were observing. The scars weren't fresh wounds that kept getting injured. They were healed scars that somehow retained the ability to reopen and bleed on a specific date, then close again, then repeat the cycle endlessly. The physical evidence was mounting, but it was the implications that truly staggered anyone who thought deeply about what was happening. Because if Nohad's scars were behaving this way, violating known laws of human physiology on a monthly basis for decades, then something beyond natural explanation was actively, continuously at work in her body. The monthly bleeding wasn't just a historical event that people had to take on faith. It was an ongoing phenomenon. Anyone could verify it, anyone could witness it, Anyone who doubted could simply show up on the 22nd and see for themselves. And people did start showing up, because word of Nohad's healing was beginning to spread beyond her immediate circle, beyond her village, beyond Lebanon itself. The story was too remarkable, too impossible, too well documented to remain contained. People heard about the mother of 12 who had been paralyzed and was now walking. They heard about the surgical scars that appeared overnight with no human surgeon performing an operation. They heard about the monthly bleeding that defied medical explanation. And they started making their own pilgrimages to Anaya on the 22nd. At first, it was just a few dozen people, curious believers, desperate seekers, people who had their own impossible situations and wondered if the saint who had healed Nohad might intercede for them as well. But the numbers grew. Dozens became hundreds, hundreds became thousands. Within a few years, the 22nd of every month had transformed into a massive gathering, a sacred day of pilgrimage that drew believers from across Lebanon and eventually from around the world. They would arrive at the hermitage in the early morning, they would pray the rosary together, they would attend Mass, and they would seek the intercession of this saint who had proven, through Nohad's ongoing physical evidence, that he was still actively working even a century after his death. Nohad found herself at the center of this growing movement. After Mass each month, pilgrims would crowd around her. They wanted to see the scars. They wanted to touch her. They wanted her to place her hands on their heads and shoulders, believing that someone who had experienced such a dramatic healing might somehow carry healing grace to others. Parents would lift their sick children toward her. The paralyzed would be wheeled close. The blind would be guided to stand before her. The chronically ill would reach out, desperate for their own miracle, hoping that what had happened to Nohad might somehow happen to them. It would have been easy for Nohad to become overwhelmed by the attention, to let it inflate her ego or corrupt her humility. But she didn't. She remained remarkably grounded, remarkably humble throughout all of it. She never claimed special powers for herself. She never suggested that she was somehow holier or more worthy than anyone else. She simply stood there, month after month, year after year, allowing people to draw hope from her presence, from the visible scars on her neck, from the testimony of her impossible recovery. Her smile was gentle, her demeanor was peaceful, and her message was always the same. This wasn't about her. This was about what God could do. This was about Saint Charbel's intercession. This was about faith, about prayer, about remaining open to possibilities that transcend our limited understanding of how the world works. The movement kept growing. The 22nd of every month became more than just a local Lebanese tradition. Churches in other countries began holding special masses on that date to honor Saint Charbel's intercession. In Israel, at Saint Charbel's church in Isfia on Mount Carmel, thousands of faithful from Galilee would gather monthly. In the United States, Maronite parishes started holding healing masses on the 22nd. The tradition spread to Europe, to Asia, to Africa, to the Americas. Catholics participated, Orthodox Christians participated. Even some Muslims, who revered Saint Charbel as a holy man, began observing the 22nd as a day of prayer and intercession. The movement transcended denominational boundaries, cultural barriers, geographic limitations. And through it all, Nohad remained faithful to her promise. Every 22nd, without fail, she made her pilgrimage to Anaya. She attended Mass. She shared her testimony. She prayed with the suffering. She offered hope to the desperate. But there was something else happening during these monthly pilgrimages, something that wouldn't become fully clear until years later. Because Nohad's relationship with Saint Charbel hadn't ended with her healing. It was continuing, deepening, evolving in ways that would produce additional miracles and transform her role from healed witness to active participant in ongoing supernatural events. The monthly communications she was having with Saint Charbel weren't just spiritual consolations or private religious experiences. They were instructions, directives, specific guidance about how to help others who were seeking the same kind of intervention she had received. And one instruction in particular, given 27 years after her original healing, would lead to a new wave of documented miracles that extended far beyond Nohad's personal experience. The vision came on January 22, 2020, 27 years to the day since Nohad's original healing. During her monthly communication with Saint Charbel, an experience she'd had 324 times by this point, something different happened. Saint Charbel appeared to her, holding an incense burner. Instead of speaking to her immediately as he usually did, he walked to a specific tree in Nohad's garden, an oak tree she had planted years earlier, following an earlier instruction he'd given her. He blessed the tree with incense, moving around it slowly, deliberately, performing what appeared to be a formal ritual of consecration. Then he turned to Nohad and gave her instructions that were remarkably specific and detailed. "Preserve these leaves carefully," he told her. "They carry healing power. Take 3 leaves." He specifically emphasized the number 3, representing the Holy Trinity, "and boil them in water. Give this water to those who are sick and suffering. Whoever drinks this water with faith and confidence will find healing." Nohad listened carefully, memorizing every word, understanding that this was important in ways she might not fully grasp yet. When the vision ended, she went immediately to the oak tree and began collecting leaves, handling them with reverence, treating them as the sacred objects Saint Charbel had indicated they were. She followed his instructions exactly. 3 leaves boiled in water, no more, no less. The preparation was simple, but Nohad treated it with the same care and precision she would give to any sacred ritual. The first person to receive this water was her neighbor, a woman named Nawal. Nawal's story was one of chronic suffering that had resisted every medical intervention. She had severe asthma that had progressively worsened over the years. The condition had deteriorated to the point where simple activities left her exhausted and struggling to breathe. She was using multiple medications, but they provided only limited temporary relief. Her quality of life had diminished steadily, and doctors had no new treatments to offer. Nohad brought her the water prepared from the blessed oak leaves. Nawal drank it, probably with a mixture of hope and skepticism that anyone in her position would feel. And then she waited to see what would happen. The change came quickly. Within days, just days, Nawal's asthma symptoms began to disappear. The chronic breathing difficulties that had plagued her for years simply vanished. Her energy returned. She could breathe freely, easily, normally for the first time in years. This wasn't a gradual improvement that might be attributed to medications finally working or natural healing processes. This was sudden, dramatic, complete. Years of suffering ended within days of drinking water prepared from Nohad's oak tree. Nawal's healing could have been dismissed as coincidence if it had stood alone, but it didn't stand alone. Word spread quickly through Nohad's community and beyond. People heard about Nawal's asthma disappearing. They heard about the water prepared from oak leaves, blessed by Saint Charbel in a vision. And they started coming to Nohad's home, asking for leaves, hoping for their own healing. Nohad gave the leaves freely to anyone who came. She never charged money. She never created barriers or requirements. She simply shared what she'd been given, along with careful instructions on how to prepare the water properly. And the reports of healings began multiplying. People with chronic pain found relief. Long-standing illnesses that had resisted medical treatment suddenly resolved. Conditions that doctors had said were incurable showed dramatic improvement or disappeared entirely. The testimonies came from diverse sources, different ages, different backgrounds, different types of ailments. But the pattern was consistent. People drank water prepared from the blessed oak leaves, and their conditions improved in ways that couldn't be easily explained by natural healing or placebo effects. Scientists and medical professionals who heard about this phenomenon struggled to make sense of it. There's no known chemical compound in oak leaves that would produce such dramatic, immediate, complete healings. Oak leaf tea has some traditional uses in folk medicine, but nothing that would explain chronic asthma vanishing within days or severe pain disappearing permanently. Yet the testimonies kept coming. The documented cases kept accumulating, and Nohad kept giving away leaves to anyone who asked, maintaining the same humble posture she'd held throughout her entire experience. The oak tree became another physical manifestation of the supernatural activity surrounding Nohad's life. Like her monthly bleeding scars, it provided tangible evidence that could be examined, tested, experienced directly. People could take the leaves home, they could prepare the water themselves. They could drink it and see what happened. This wasn't based on historical claims that had to be accepted on faith. This was happening in real time, producing effects that people could witness and verify. But the oak tree wasn't the only ongoing physical manifestation. There was something else happening in Nohad's home that added yet another layer to this already extraordinary story. A painting of Saint Charbel hanging on her wall began exuding oil, not condensation from humidity, not moisture that could be explained by environmental factors. Oil, clear, fragrant oil that would appear on the surface of the painting with no natural source. This phenomenon is actually well documented at Saint Charbel's tomb in Anaya, where oil has been flowing from his relics for decades. But now it was happening in Nohad's home, on an ordinary painting, providing another ongoing miracle that visitors could witness firsthand. Nohad would collect this oil carefully, treating it as sacred. She would share it with visitors who came seeking healing or blessing. And just like with the oak leaves, reports came back of people experiencing healings, answered prayers, relief from suffering after being anointed with the oil from Nohad's painting. The physical evidence kept accumulating. The monthly bleeding scars, the oak tree with healing leaves, the painting exuding oil. Each element on its own might be dismissed or explained away. But taken together, they formed a pattern of supernatural activity that was difficult to deny or ignore. For years this continued. Nohad's life became a rhythm of service, witness, and faithfulness. Every 22nd, she made her pilgrimage. Every month, her scars bled. Every day, people came seeking leaves, seeking oil, seeking prayer, seeking hope. She never grew tired of it. She never turned people away. She never lost the gentle smile or peaceful demeanor that had characterized her from the beginning. She remained humble, faithful, consistent. The movement she'd sparked continued growing. Tens of thousands of people were now gathering monthly on the 22nd in locations around the world. Churches held special masses, prayer groups formed. Communities organized pilgrimages, all because of what had happened to one mother of 12 in January 1993. Time passed, years accumulated. Nohad aged naturally, as all human beings do, but her commitment never wavered. Her promise to Saint Charbel remained unbroken. Her testimony stayed consistent. And then, after 32 years of faithful witness, after 324 months of bleeding scars, after countless healings attributed to the oak leaves and miraculous oil, Nohad's earthly journey came to its end. What happened after her death would reveal the true depth of her impact and the lasting significance of everything she'd experienced. May 14th, 2025, Nohad El Shami passed away at the age of 87. The news spread quickly through the Lebanese Christian community and beyond. Social media posts announced her death. Churches prepared memorial services, news outlets reported her passing. And thousands of people who had never met her personally felt a profound sense of loss. For 32 years, from January 1993 until her death, Nohad had faithfully kept every promise she'd made to Saint Charbel. Every 22nd of the month, without fail, she had made her pilgrimage to Anaya. She had attended Mass regularly. She had shared her testimony with anyone who wanted to hear it. And for 27 of those years, her scars had bled monthly, providing ongoing physical evidence that something beyond natural explanation had occurred. 324 times. Those wounds had opened and bled on schedule. 324 times witnesses had watched it happen, unable to deny what they were seeing. The question many people had been wondering for years now had an answer. What would happen when Nohad was no longer here? Would the movement she'd sparked continue? Would the monthly gatherings lose their significance? Would people stop believing once the living witness was gone? The answer came quickly. The monthly gatherings didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Pilgrims still fill the hermitage in Anaya every 22nd. Churches worldwide still hold special masses on that date. The oak leaves from her garden are treasured like sacred relics, still being shared with the sick and suffering. The movement has taken on a life of its own, sustained not by Nohad's presence, but by the undeniable evidence she left behind. In 2025, director Samir Habchi made a film about her life, Nohad El Shami, A Sign of Faith, with actress Maya Yamin portraying the woman whose impossible healing sparked a global phenomenon. But here's what her story ultimately forces us to confront. What do we do with evidence that doesn't fit our understanding of reality? This wasn't based on feelings or interpretations. Nohad had surgical scars that appeared overnight with no human surgeon. Medical scans confirmed actual bilateral carotid artery surgery had been performed. Yet no hospital records existed. Those scars then bled monthly for 27 years on a precise schedule that violated every principle of human physiology. The oak tree produced leaves that healed chronic conditions doctors had declared incurable. Oil exuded from her painting with no natural source. And through it all, for 32 years, Nohad never sought fame or profit. She never changed her story. She simply remained faithful, humble, consistent until her death. The skeptic can try explaining away individual elements, but the entire pattern, the medical documentation, the thousands of witnesses, the decades of physical evidence, the ongoing healings, the 32 years of unwavering testimony, becomes harder to dismiss the more honestly you examine it. What Nohad's life suggests is that reality might be far larger than our materialistic worldview allows, that prayer might accomplish more than psychological comfort, that the supernatural might interact with the natural world in ways we're only beginning to understand. For those who witnessed it, who saw the scars, watched them bleed, experienced their own healings, participated in the monthly gatherings, these weren't abstract possibilities. They were lived realities that changed everything they believed about what's possible. And now, even after Nohad's death, the movement continues. New believers hear the story and join the monthly pilgrimages. Parents with sick children find hope. The paralyzed find encouragement. The suffering find comfort. Not because Nohad claimed to be special, but because her life testified to something beyond the material. A reality where the impossible can suddenly become actual, where prayers can be answered in tangible ways, where the boundaries we think are absolute can be crossed. This is the story of Nohad El Shami, a mother who was paralyzed and healed by a monk dead for 95 years. A woman who woke with surgical scars from an operation no human performed. A witness whose body bled monthly for 27 years, providing undeniable evidence of the supernatural. She never asked to become a global phenomenon. She simply experienced something impossible and spent 32 years faithfully sharing it. The scars were real. The medical documentation exists. The thousands of witnesses have names and faces. The monthly gatherings continue to this day. The healings are documented with real medical histories. You can dismiss it all, constructing explanations no matter how strained. Or you can sit with the possibility that Nohad's testimony points to something true, something that challenges what we think is possible and invites us to reconsider the boundaries between the natural and supernatural. Either way, her story refuses to be forgotten. It continues to resonate, continues to challenge, continues to inspire anyone willing to honestly examine what happened. Somewhere right now, in churches around the world, people are gathering on the 22nd to honor a humble mother whose impossible healing proved that sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be the most true. Now, I want to hear from you. After everything you've learned, what's your take? Do you think this was a genuine miracle, or is there something we're missing? Have you ever witnessed something that defied explanation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every one. If this story moved you or challenged how you think about what's possible, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone going through their own impossible situation. Someone who's lost hope. Stories like Nohad's remind us that sometimes the impossible becomes possible in ways we never expected. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. I'm uncovering more documented cases of the unexplainable Catholic saint stories that will challenge everything you think you know. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping an open mind. And remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be the most true. I'll see you in the next one.